4 matches, 4 completely different corners of the football world. One afternoon that stretched from the islands of the Indian Ocean to the highlands of Africa, from the Czech lower leagues to the oil-soaked intensity of Egyptian club football. The scorelines are simple enough on paper, but when have scorelines ever told the full story? Lesotho turned Seychelles upside down on their own patch. Ethiopia silenced Sao Tome without reply. Belotin held off Prerov in a contest that had no right to be as gripping as it was, and Enppi ground out the only goal needed to see off Petrojet. But how did any of it actually happen? That is where things get interesting. Seychelles 1-2 Lesotho pre-match. What does it mean to play a competitive football match on an island nation in the middle of the Indian Ocean, where the distract irons of paradise press in from every direction? Does the setting make focus harder, or does it create a strange isolation that sharpens the mind in ways a conventional football environment never could? These are the questions that follow Lesotho as they arrive, knowing that the psychological battle here begins long before kickoff. Seychelles are playing at home, and yet the curious thing about home advantage in African football is how differently it manifests depending on the nation. Is the crowd here truly capable of influencing this game, or is the real pressure something the home side carries entirely within themselves? Nobody knows the answer to that until the atmosphere inside the ground is actually tested by something going wrong. Lesotho have traveled an enormous distance to be here, and distance in international football is never simply a matter of miles. It is fatigue, disrupted sleep, unfamiliar food, and the quiet psychological toll of being far from anything recognizable. So here is the first genuine question of the afternoon: has that journey cost them something, or has the challenge of making it actually brought them closer together? First half. Seychelles begin with the energy of a home side that genuinely believes today is their day, and that belief is visible in everything they do: the pressing, the communication, the willingness to take risks in advanced areas. But belief and execution are 2 entirely separate conversations, and which one dominates this first half will shape everything that follows. Lesotho are measured in their response. They are not rattled by the atmosphere or the early pressure, and that composure raises a fascinating question: where exactly does a team from the Mountain Kingdom develop the kind of mental fortitude to absorb early pressure on foreign soil and still look organized? The answer probably lives somewhere in their recent history, but it is worth sitting with the question regardless. The goal, when Seychelles find it, arrives in a way that should settle the game but somehow does the opposite. The home side take the lead and the crowd responds with a noise that feels definitive. 1-0. Game over, surely, but why does it feel, even in this moment of celebration, as though Lesotho have not been broken? There is something in the way the visiting players reset, calmly, without panic, without pointed fingers, that tells a different story entirely. Lesotho equalize before halftime, and the silence that follows in the home sections is one of those silences that contains an entire psychological shift inside it. How does a team that was leading, that had the crowd behind them, that had every reason to believe, suddenly look so fragile? The equalizer does not just level the score, it levels the belief, and that is a far more serious problem. Second half. Lesotho come out for the second half with the look of a team that has realized something important. What have they realized? That they are better than their hosts, that the equalizer was not a relief but a platform, that the winner is not just possible, it is coming. How a team communicates that realization without words, purely through the way they move and press and organize, is one of the great unspoken languages of football. Seychelles are retreating, and every step backwards is a question: are they doing this tactically, or has the belief genuinely drained out of them after conceding that equalizer? The distinction matters enormously because one can be corrected at halftime and the other cannot be corrected at all. The winning goal arrives with a quality that Lesotho thoroughly deserve. A move that combines patience with sudden acceleration, that finds space where space seemed impossible, and finishes with a conviction that leaves the goalkeeper with absolutely no answers. 2-1 to Lesotho. Now the most interesting question of all presents itself: can Seychelles find something in the final minutes, or has this game already been decided in the minds of both sets of players? The final whistle confirms what the second half always suggested. Lesotho win 2-1. They came to a paradise island, fell behind, equalized, then won it. That is not luck. That is character. And character, as anyone who follows football seriously will tell you, is the most underrated statistic in the entire sport. Sao Tome 0-2 Ethiopia pre-match. Sao Tome and Principe is one of the smallest nations on the African continent, and yet they line up for competitive football with the same dignity and determination as any nation many times their size. Does the size of a country actually matter when 22 players step onto a pitch and the referee's whistle sounds? The stadium may not be vast, the squad depth may not be deep, but the desire to compete, that appears to know no borders. Ethiopia arrive with considerably more resources and a football infrastructure that dwarfs their hosts in every measurable way. But football has a long and glorious history of rendering measurable advantages meaningless on match day, and that history must be sitting somewhere in the back of the Ethiopian coaching staff's mind as they prepare. Complacency in African football is a trap that has claimed far bigger reputations than this. First half Ethiopia settle into this game with a professionalism that suggests they have done their homework and found very little to surprise them. But is that confidence or assumption? The line between the two is thinner than most people admit, and Sao Tome spend the early stages of this match testing which side of that line Ethiopia are actually standing on. The first goal comes through Ethiopian persistence rather than brilliance. They work the ball wide repeatedly, probe the defensive structure, and eventually find a moment where everything opens up simultaneously. The finish is composed and clinical, and you find yourself asking, why does a goal that looked complicated in the build-up always look simple in the execution? 1-0, and Sao Tome now face the oldest challenge in football. How do you reset after conceding against a side that is technically superior? The answer, unfortunately for the home side, is that resetting requires a belief that the gap can be bridged, and every time Sao Tome build an attack, Ethiopia's defensive shape reminds them of exactly how wide that gap is. Halftime arrives at 1-0, and the question in the dressing rooms could not be more different from one another. Second half Ethiopia's second goal is both inevitable and fascinating. Inevitable because the home side has nothing left tactically to surprise them with. Fascinating because of the specific moment chosen to deliver it, a period when Sao Tome had just produced their best spell of the game and almost genuinely believed something was possible. Why does football so frequently punish hope at the exact moment hope feels most justified? 2-0. The game is over as a contest, but Sao Tome do not stop. They press, they run, they chase every ball to the byline, and that refusal to accept the scoreline is something their supporters will remember long after the result itself has faded. Is there dignity in defeat? In football, on afternoons like this one, the answer is absolutely yes. Belotin 2-1 Prerov pre-match Czech lower league football operates in a world almost entirely removed from the noise and spectacle of the top flight, and that removal is precisely what makes it worth paying attention to. Here, among modest grounds and tight-knit communities, the game is played for love more than anything else. So what exactly drives a player at this level to train all week, travel across the country, and compete with everything they have for a result that most of the world will never hear about? Prerov arrive as visitors with their own ambitions and their own tactical identity, and in the lower tiers of Czech football, tactical identity is often more clearly defined than in the professional game. These coaches have time with their players. They communicate deeply. They build systems that reflect genuine philosophy. Does that make the football more interesting? Quite possibly. First half Belotin impose themselves early, and the manner in which they do it raises an interesting question about home advantage at non-league level. Is the crowd here louder in terms of influence than a professional crowd 3 times its size? There are arguments for yes, and watching Belotin in these opening exchanges makes those arguments feel credible. The lead comes through a piece of football that would not look out of place several leagues higher. A quick combination, a clever run in behind, and a finish that the goalkeeper simply cannot reach. 1-0. The home supporters celebrate with an intensity that reminds you this result matters to them in ways that are deeply personal. When has football ever not been personal? Prerov leveled the game before the break and suddenly everything changes. How does one goal so completely reorganize the emotional geography of an entire match? One moment Belotin are in control and the crowd is behind them, the next the visiting players are celebrating in front of a section of away support that roars back at the home end. 1-1 at halftime, and 2 very different conversations happening in 2 very different changing rooms. Second half. The second half of this game is everything that makes lower league football worth watching. It is not always technically refined, it is not always tactically sophisticated, but it is absolutely, relentlessly honest. Every tackle is committed, every header is contested, every yard of the pitch is competed for as though it is the last yard available. Belotin find the winner through a combination of fortune and determination, which is perhaps the most accurate description of how most important goals in football actually arrive. A set piece, a penalty area scramble, a moment where the ball falls kindly to the right person at the right time, and then the net moves and the ground erupts. 2-1. Will Prerov have enough to find an equalizer? Do they believe they do, or has the goal taken something from them that cannot be recovered in the remaining minutes? The final whistle answers that question. Belotin hold on. 2-1, and 3 points that mean the world to everyone connected with this club. Football does not stop being meaningful simply because fewer people are watching. If anything, the fewer people watching, the more meaningful it becomes to the ones who are. Enppi 1-0 Petrojet pre-match Egyptian club football carries a weight that is difficult to explain to someone who has never encountered it. The passion, the history, the rivalry, all of it compressed into fixtures that feel more like occasions than games. Enppi versus Petrojet is a meeting of two clubs whose identities are tied to the energy industry, and there is something almost poetic about that. Two sides forged in the same industrial world, now competing in the entirely different arena of sport. Does that shared background create a specific kind of rivalry, one where the needle is set slightly differently than it would be between clubs from opposite ends of the social spectrum? These are the questions that drift around Egyptian football conversations, and they never quite get resolved because the rivalry itself keeps producing new evidence to consider. First half, both sides begin with an obvious respect for the other's threat, and respect in football is a fascinating thing to observe because it can manifest as either intelligent caution or paralyzing hesitation. In the early stages of this fixture, it looks closer to the former, and the quality of the defensive organization on both sides is genuinely impressive to watch. Enppi find the goal that wins this game in the first half, and the manner of it is almost cruel in its simplicity. Petrojet have been well organized, disciplined, and difficult to break down, and then, in a single unguarded moment, the ball is in the net. Why does defensive concentration so frequently fail at the very moment it has been strongest? That question haunts every goalkeeper who has ever conceded after a sustained period of clean work. 1-0, Enppi lead, and now the entire second half becomes a different kind of test entirely. Second half, Petrojet push for the equalizer with a conviction that makes the second half far more compelling than a one-goal game has any right to be. They create, they press, they find angles that the Enppi defense is forced to deal with repeatedly and at pace. So why can they not find the goal? Is the goalkeeper exceptional today, or is Petrojet simply finding the wrong answer to the right questions at precisely the wrong moments? Enppi defend with everything they have, and defending a one-goal lead is one of the most psychologically complex tasks in team sport. Every clearance matters, every blocked shot matters, every set-piece conceded raises the collective heart rate of an entire team simultaneously. How do you manage that tension and still make good decisions under it? The answer, at least on this afternoon, is that Enppi manage it just well enough. The final whistle arrives and the 1-0 stands. 3 points, a clean sheet, and the quiet and showy satisfaction of a team that did what was required and nothing more. In a sport that so often rewards the spectacular, there is something deeply admirable about the functional, the disciplined, and the resolute. 4 matches, 4 completely different worlds. And yet every single one of them asked exactly the same fundamental question: which team wants it more when the moment arrives? In Seychelles, Lesotho answered loudest. In Sao Tome, Ethiopia answered most clinically. In Belotin, the home side answered most passionately. And in Egypt, Enppi answered most efficiently. Football does not care where you are playing or who is watching. It only ever cares about the answer you give when the question is put directly to you.